A strange plane, twin tails, engines screaming on both sides, to Japanese pilots. It looked awkward, even clumsy. They joked it wasn't a fighter at all, more like two planes stitched together. Something too heavy to turn, too odd to fear. But the laughter didn't last, because that odd plane had a secret. It could climb higher than their Zeros. It could dive faster than they ever imagined, and once it locked onto a target, there was no escape. This was the P-38 Lightning, and the same pilots who mocked it would soon be running from it. Stay with me, because this is the story of how one strange fighter flipped the balance of the Pacific skies. When war exploded across the Pacific in 1941, one plane ruled the skies. It wasn't American. It wasn't British. It was Japanese. The Mitsubishi A6M0. Two pilots who faced it for the first time. It felt almost unfair. The Zero was light. It was fast. And it could turn tighter than anything the Allies had in the air. Dogfighting against a Zero was like boxing with someone who could move twice as fast every time you swung. They were already behind you. One American pilot later said, "It felt like the Zero could dance in the sky while we were stuck in the mud." And in 1941 and 1942, that was the truth. The Zero shocked the world at Pearl Harbor. It kept shocking the world as Japanese pilots pushed across the Pacific. From the Philippines to Singapore, from the Coral Sea to Java, the Zero showed up. Again and again. It was like a ghost you couldn't shake. At first, many American planes were simply outclassed. The P-40 Warhawk, the F-4F Wildcat. Brave pilots flew them with all they had. But against the Zero's agility, they often felt like second-best machines in a deadly game. The Zero could climb faster. It could turn inside almost anything. And it had guns that hit hard when it found your tail. American pilots had to learn the hard way. Some went into battle thinking courage was enough. But courage alone didn't win when the enemy's plane could twist, dive, and strike before you even lined up your shot. Stories spread quickly through the ranks. Pilots would return, shaken, saying things like, "That plane, it doesn't fight fair." Some even believed the Japanese had broken the laws of physics with this machine. The truth was simpler. The Zero was built differently. Lightweight, no heavy armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. It sacrificed protection for performance, and in the early war years, that gamble worked. Japanese pilots, many already veterans from fighting in China, knew exactly how to use it. They dove into combat with confidence. They circled and cut off their enemies. They pressed attacks even when outnumbered. And so in 1941 and 1942, the Zero dominated the skies. It wasn't just a fighter plane. It was a symbol that Japan controlled the air. American pilots knew it. Every mission carried a silent question. If I see a Zero up there, will I make it back? For a while, the answer wasn't comforting. The Zero reigned supreme. But that reign wouldn't last forever, because soon, a new fighter was coming. One that wouldn't just match the Zero, it would change the war. By early 1942, America was in trouble. The war in the Pacific wasn't just going badly. It was a nightmare. Planes were falling. Pilots weren't coming back. And morale was slipping fast. Every time American bombers took off, the new Zeros would be waiting. Every time a pilot strapped in, he knew the odds were against him. It wasn't a fair fight. The Zero was lighter, faster, and deadlier. And for a while, it looked like nothing could stop it. Commanders knew they couldn't keep fighting like this. They couldn't just match the Zero. They had to beat it, outfly it, outclimb it, outgun it. What they needed wasn't just another fighter. They needed a game changer, and that's when Lockheed stepped in. Now, Lockheed wasn't like other companies. They weren't afraid to take risks, and when the U.S. Army Air Corps asked for a high-altitude interceptor years before the war, Lockheed delivered something strange. The first time people saw it, they didn't even believe it was real. It had not one tail, but two, not one engine, but two, each mounted in long booms stretching back like spears. And in the center, a tiny pod where the pilot sat, like an insect between giant wings. It didn't look like a fighter. It looked like something from another planet. Pilots joked that it was two airplanes welded together. Ground crews called it weird, ugly, even impossible. But hidden inside that radical design was pure genius. Those twin engines, Allison V-1710s, each supercharged, each ready to push the Lightning higher and faster than almost anything else in the sky. The twin tails, perfect for stability at high speed. When other planes started to shake themselves apart, and that central pod, packed with firepower, all the guns, 4.50 caliber machine guns, and a 20mm cannon were in the nose, meaning they hit with laser precision. No wing-mounted guns that sprayed wide, no drifting bullets, just raw, concentrated fire. On paper, it was exactly what America needed, a fighter that wasn't just different, it was superior. But here's the twist. When the P-38 Lightning first arrived, even American pilots didn't trust it. It was too big, too heavy, too strange. Many thought it would fail. What they didn't know, that this weird twin-boom experiment was about to rewrite the rules of aerial combat. And the Japanese pilots who laughed at it were about to stop laughing. The first time the P-38 Lightning appeared in the sky, pilots didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't like any fighter they had seen before. Two engines, two long booms stretching backward, a cockpit pod sitting in the middle like an alien bubble. It looked less like a plane and more like two planes fused together by mistake. In the sleek world of dogfighters, where beauty often meant danger, the P-38 looked wrong. Big, heavy, unusual. Even some American pilots doubted it. They wondered, how could something this big, this strange, ever stand up against a Zero or a Messerschmitt? Most fighters of the era followed one rule: keep it small, keep it light, keep it fast. The Lightning broke that rule in every way. It wasn't small, it wasn't light, it was massive, the largest single-seat fighter of World War II. And yet, that size wasn't a weakness. It was hiding something. The twin engines were Allison V-1710s, turbo-supercharged monsters. Together, they gave the Lightning more than 3,000 horsepower, more than enough to push this strange machine faster and higher than anyone expected. But at first glance, enemies didn't see that. When German pilots spotted it over Europe, they laughed. They said it looked like a flying trident. They mocked it as clumsy, oversized, ridiculous. But when the battles began, the laughter stopped, because those same Germans soon gave it a new name: Der Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil, a name born out of fear, because once they saw what it could do, the dives, the speed, the firepower, they realized it wasn't clumsy at all, it was deadly. In the Pacific, Japanese pilots were slower to learn that lesson. At first, they underestimated it. The Zero was still their champion. It could outturn almost anything. It had humiliated American planes again and again. So when they saw the Lightning, with its wide wings and heavy frame, they thought, easy target. But the P-38 wasn't designed to play the Zero's game. It didn't need to turn tighter. It didn't need to dance in circles. It fought differently. It fought with speed, altitude, and raw power. The Lightning could climb higher than the Zero. It could dive faster, and it carried something the Zero didn't have: concentrated firepower. All its guns sat in the nose for .50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. No spreading fire from wing mounts, no scattered bullets. When a Lightning fired, it was like pointing a giant spear through the sky. Every round tore straight toward the target. At first, Japanese pilots didn't realize how dangerous that was. They thought they could still outrun it, still outclimb it, still outmaneuver it. But soon, the truth hit them. The P-38 wasn't the easy target they imagined. It was the hunter, and they were the hunted. The twin-boom design that once made people laugh now struck fear. The Lightning had arrived, and the skies would never be the same. At the heart of the P-38 Lightning was its greatest secret: not one engine, but two, each one an Allison V-1710, each one fitted with a turbo supercharger that made it breathe easy, even at high altitudes where other planes choked. Together, those engines gave the Lightning something no other fighter of its time could match: speed, range, and reliability. In the Pacific, that mattered more than anything. The distances were enormous. Oceans stretched in every direction. Pilots weren't just fighting enemy planes. They were fighting miles of open water, far from home. Most fighters of the day didn't have the range. They could patrol for a short while, maybe engage in a dogfight, but then they had to turn back or risk running out of fuel. The P-38 changed that. With twin engines and massive fuel capacity, it could fly farther, escort bombers deeper, and stay in the fight longer. It wasn't chained to short missions. It was free to roam the Pacific. Japanese pilots weren't ready for that. They were used to American fighters showing up in small bursts, limited in how far they could go. The P-38 could chase them for hours. It could find them in places they once thought safe. But range wasn't the only gift those engines gave. There was safety, because when you fly in combat, danger isn't just the enemy's bullets. Engines fail, fuel lines burst, sometimes luck just runs out for a single-engine pilot. That meant one thing: bail out or die. But the Lightning's pilots had something rare, a second chance. If one engine was hit, the other could still carry them home. Not fast, not easy, but alive. There are stories of P-38s limping back hundreds of miles on a single engine, smoking, shaking, but still in the air. One pilot said, "The Lightning gave you a promise. Even wounded, it would not abandon you." And when word of that spread, morale soared. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a lifeline. The turbo superchargers made the difference in combat, too. At high altitude, the Zero struggled. Its engine gasped thin air, lost power, and slowed down. The P-38, it thrived. The superchargers fed the engine steady power, letting it climb higher, strike faster, and escape when needed. That's why Japanese pilots soon found themselves shocked. They tried to climb away from the Lightning and failed. They tried to dive away and watched it follow. Because the P-38 wasn't just another fighter, it was an engine with wings, and then another engine, twin hearts, twin claws, one predator. The Lightning's design may have looked strange, but those twin engines made it unstoppable for the pilots who flew it. They weren't just machines. They were a promise that even in the vast Pacific, even in the middle of nowhere, the Lightning would bring them home. The Pacific Ocean, it wasn't just water, it was distance, miles and miles of endless blue. A battlefield so vast, planes often disappeared into it forever, for years. That distance was Japan's shield. The Zero was deadly in combat, yes, but its reach was short. It could fight close to its bases. It could protect islands nearby. But long missions, deep escorts, that wasn't its strength for American pilots. This was a nightmare. Their bombers needed protection, but their early fighters couldn't make the trip. The distances were too great. Planes ran out of fuel before they even reached enemy airfields. That meant bombers often flew alone, and alone, they were easy prey. Japanese Zeros would swoop down, cut them apart, and vanish before American fighters could even catch up. Every mission was a gamble, every raid bled crews. And planes, something had to change. And then came the P-38 Lightning, 2 engines, long wings, and most importantly range. The Lightning could fly farther than any other American fighter in the war's early years. It could leave its base, climb high, escort bombers hundreds of miles, and still have the fuel to fight. And to return. Suddenly, Japan's shield of distance was gone. Bombers were no longer alone. When the flying fortresses roared toward enemy strongholds, the P-38s flew with them sharp, fast, and deadly. They were the guardians in the sky. Japanese pilots were stunned. They had grown used to slow bombers arriving UNDEFENDED. Now, sleek twin boom fighters waited at the edges of the formation. And if a Zero tried to strike, the Lightning pounced. It changed everything, because this wasn't just about one battle. This was about reach. America could now project power across thousands of miles of open ocean. No island was too far. No base was truly safe. The Japanese strategy had relied on distance, on spreading across the Pacific, knowing their enemies couldn't cover that ground. But the P-38 erased that advantage. From Guadalcanal to New Guinea, from the Solomons to the Philippines, the Lightning stretched American air power farther and farther. It was a machine built for the Pacific. Its long legs gave the Allies something priceless: presence, the ability to be where the enemy thought they could not. And when that presence arrived, it arrived with 8.50 caliber guns and a 20mm cannon waiting to fire. The Zero could still outturn. It could still twist and climb in a tight circle. But it couldn't outrun the Lightning, and it couldn't outlast it. In the Pacific, that was the difference, because wars aren't just won by speed, they're won by reach. And when the P-38 spread its wings, America reached across the ocean and brought the fight to Japan's doorstep. The Pacific was no longer their shield. It had become their battlefield. When a Japanese pilot first saw the P-38 Lightning head-on, he didn't always understand what he was looking at. To tails, a wide body, and in the very center, a cluster of barrels staring straight back at him. 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns, and 120mm cannon, all packed into the nose. It doesn't sound unusual at first, until you realize why it mattered. Most fighters of the era had their guns mounted in the wings. It looked intimidating, yes. But there was a problem. Those streams of bullets didn't fly straight. They crossed at a point, called convergence. Pilots had to guess the distance. Too close, bullets flew wide. Too far, bullets spread harmlessly around the target. The P-38 didn't play that game. Every single round came straight out of the nose, No spread, no guessing, just pure, concentrated firepower. One burst, one line of death. When a lightning opened fire, it wasn't spraying and praying, it was carving. A focused beam of destruction. And the effect was shocking. A single half-second burst from those guns could tear through a Zero's thin skin, rip open engines, shatter cockpits, send wings flying off like paper. The 20mm cannon only made it worse. One hit could turn an enemy fighter into flaming wreckage. 2 hits could erase it completely. Japanese pilots, used to dueling with planes that needed long bursts to score kills, suddenly faced an enemy that needed only one. American pilots loved it. They joked that the Lightning wasn't a fighter, it was a buzzsaw. One ace later said, "All I needed was one pass. If I got that burst on target, it was over." That changed the psychology of air combat. The Zero still had agility. It could twist and turn tighter than almost anything. But what good was turning if the fight ended before the first turn? P-38 pilots learned to dive in, line up their shot, and let the nose gun speak, then climb back up, ready to strike again. The concentrated fire meant fewer wasted bullets, fewer wasted seconds, and faster kills. It gave American pilots confidence. It gave Japanese pilots nightmares, and it wasn't just for fighters. Those guns could shred bombers, transports, even ships. The Lightning became a hunter of everything in the sky, and sometimes even on the sea. No convergence, no hesitation, no escape. The Lightning didn't just carry guns. It carried certainty, the certainty that when it fired, something was going down. And that's why the P-38 earned respect not just from its enemies, but from the men who flew it. Because in a war where 1 second decided life or death, the Lightning's firepower gave them the edge that could not be matched. In air combat, height means power. The pilot above chooses the fight. The pilot below only reacts. For years, the Zero had ruled the skies of the Pacific. It could twist and turn with grace. It could climb quickly in the lower altitudes, and it gave Japanese pilots a sense of control. But the P-38 Lightning changed the rules. Thanks to its twin-turbo superchargers, the Lightning thrived where the Zero suffocated. High above the clouds, where the air was thin, where the fight became about engines, not just wings. Japanese engines struggled up there. They weren't built for it. At 20,000 feet, their power drained away. At 30,000 feet, their speed bled off. At 35,000, they were nearly helpless. But the P-38, it was just getting started. The turbochargers kept feeding air into those 2 Allison engines, kept the horsepower strong, kept the climb steady. It could reach heights the Japanese couldn't follow, and that was a shock. For the first time, Japanese pilots looked up and saw danger. The Lightning wasn't waiting below, it was waiting above. From those heights, P-38s became predators. They could stalk silently, then dive like thunder. The attack came fast, straight, and deadly. A Zero, trying to climb away, suddenly discovered the truth. It couldn't. Its engine wheezed, starved of air. Its speed dropped. And then, the Lightning's guns tore through it. One Japanese survivor later admitted, "We could not understand how they were above us. It felt impossible." The truth was simple. Technology had tilted the fight. The Lightning had turned the sky upside down. What had once been the Zero's playground was now the Lightning's hunting ground. Altitude gave the P-38 other advantages, too. From higher up, pilots had more vision. They could spot enemy formations before being spotted themselves. They chose when to strike. They chose when to vanish. It was dominance from above. For American bomber crews, that was a lifeline. Flying deep into enemy territory, they were vulnerable. But when P-38s circled high above them, the bombers felt protected. They knew the Lightning would see trouble coming first. And for Japanese pilots, the psychology was devastating. They were used to being hunters. Suddenly, they were prey. Every shadow above could be a Lightning waiting to dive. The Pacific sky had changed. No longer did Japan's planes own the vertical fight. Now, the advantage belonged to America. The P-38 had given its pilots the ultimate edge, altitude superiority, and in air combat. That meant only one thing. The fight was no longer equal. The fight was decided before it even began. Because when the Lightning came from above, the battle was already over. Speed is power, and in the Pacific skies, speed was survival. The Japanese Zero had many gifts. It was agile, it was light, it could twist and turn in a dogfight like no other. But there was one thing it could not do: dive, push a Zero too fast. And its wings began to shudder, force it into a steep dive, and the airframe itself could rip apart. Every Japanese pilot knew this. It was their silent limit. The P-38 Lightning had no such weakness. With its strong twin-boom frame and powerful turbocharged engines, it could dive harder, faster, and longer than anything the Japanese had. 500 miles per hour, even more, and through it all steady. The Lightning didn't fear the dive, it owned it. American pilots quickly learned to use this to their advantage. They called it boom and zoom. Here's how it worked. Climb high, stay above the enemy, watch for the perfect moment, then push the nose down and let gravity turn the Lightning into a thunderbolt. At those speeds, the Zero had no chance. It couldn't escape, it couldn't turn tight enough, it couldn't dive away without breaking apart. By the time the Japanese pilot realized what was happening, it was already too late. The P-38's guns opened up. 4.50 calibers and a 20mm cannon firing in a single stream of destruction. A burst of lead that tore through planes before they even reacted. Then, before any enemy could strike back, the Lightning pulled up, back into the sky, back to safety, ready to dive again. Again and again, the tactic worked. Dive. Strike. Escape. One Japanese pilot later confessed, "We could not follow them down. If we tried, we died." That was the terror of the Lightning's speed. It turned combat into a one-sided fight. The Zero could win in a slow, turning duel. But the Lightning never gave them that chance. It wasn't interested in dancing. It was interested in killing. And the dive was its hammer. Stories spread among American squadrons of P-38s coming back riddled with holes yet alive, while Japanese Zeros, caught in one burst from above, never returned. The psychology shifted. American pilots felt confident. They knew they had a weapon the enemy couldn't match. Japanese pilots, on the other hand, began to fear the sky above them. Every glint in the sun might be a Lightning preparing to strike. The Pacific Air War was no longer equal, because the P-38 didn't just fight, it punished. And when it dove, it wasn't just a plane, it was a hammer falling from the heavens, fast, inevitable, deadly. The Lightning's speed wasn't just an advantage, it was a death sentence. In 1942, the Pacific skies still belonged to Japan. The Zero was king, fast, agile, deadly. It had humbled every American plane it faced. So when Japanese pilots first spotted the strange, twin-tailed P-38 Lightning, they weren't impressed. It looked big, awkward, heavy. They expected an easy kill, another clumsy machine that would twist, stall, and fall apart once the fight began. But the Lightning wasn't what it seemed. The first encounters came over New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. American squadrons, still bruised from months of defeat, brought the P-38 into combat for the first time. And almost immediately, everything changed. Japanese pilots dove in with confidence. They turned hard, expecting the Lightning to follow, but it didn't. Instead, it climbed. And it kept climbing, higher and higher, until the Zero's engine gasped for air and stalled. From above, the Lightning rolled over and struck like a predator. Its guns opened up 4.50 calibers and a 20mm cannon spitting fire in a single, deadly stream. One burst, one kill. The Japanese pilots were stunned. The Zero had always owned the vertical fight, but now, they were the ones being hunted from above. Others tried to escape by diving away. It had always worked before. The Zero might not be strong at high altitude, but in a dive it could usually slip free. Not this time. The P-38 stayed steady as it dropped like a stone, hitting speeds the Zero could never survive. Its frame held together, its engine screamed, and the Lightning closed in, faster and faster. Bullets ripped through the air. Another Zero gone. The lesson was brutal. The P-38 didn't play by the old rules. It didn't need to outturn a Zero. It didn't need to dance in tight circles. It was faster, higher, deadlier. One Japanese pilot later admitted, "We thought it was slow, but once it climbed, we could not follow. Once it dived, we could not escape." And that realization spread quickly. Word reached Japanese squadrons that a new machine was in the sky. A machine that could chase them where they were strongest. A machine that could catch them where they felt safe. American pilots, once afraid of meeting Zeros head-on, suddenly found themselves with confidence. They used the Lightning's strength, altitude, speed, and firepower to flip the fight. And for the first time, the hunters became the hunted. The Pacific Air War was no longer one-sided. The balance was shifting, and it started with those first encounters. When Japanese pilots discovered that the strange, twin-tailed fighter was not a joke at all. It was a nightmare. The P-38 Lightning had arrived, and the skies of the Pacific would never be the same. At first, Japanese pilots believed the Zero was untouchable. It could twist tighter. It could turn sharper. It had ruled every sky since Pearl Harbor. But then came the lightning. At first, they laughed at it. Twin tails, bulky frame, a machine that looked like it belonged on the ground, not in the air. But the first real encounters erased those smiles. One Japanese pilot dove, confident he could shake pursuit. He'd done it dozens of times before. The Zero was light, quick, a master of escape. But when he looked back, the P-38 was still there. Not falling behind, not breaking apart, still there steady, closing the gap. And in the next instant, guns opened fire. The Zero exploded in a ball of flame. The story spread fast. The lightning could dive, deeper, faster, longer than anything Japan had. Another pilot tried climbing away. The Zero was built for quick climbs at low altitude. But the higher it went, the weaker it became. Engines gasped thin air. Speed bled away. The P-38 didn't slow. Its turbo superchargers fed power at 20,000, 25,000, even 30,000 feet. And when it caught up, the concentrated nose guns shredded the Zero before it could even turn. Again, the story spread. The lightning could climb, higher than anyone thought possible. Soon, pilots were whispering in their tents at night. The old rules of dogfighting rules they had trusted no longer worked. Turn fights. The P-38 refused to play. Dives, it would follow. Climbs, it would outpace you. The Zero's greatest strengths were now weaknesses. And that shook the Japanese spirit. Fear began to spread faster than bullets. Some pilots admitted they no longer wanted to engage when they saw the twin tails. Others said they felt doomed the moment a lightning appeared above them. One Japanese ace confessed after the war, when the P-38 came, the fight was already lost. It was not a plane we could beat. It was a plane we survived if we were lucky. That fear changed everything. The hunter's confidence was gone. The once dominant Zero pilots, who had laughed at American machines, now looked at the sky with doubt. Every glint of sunlight above might be a lightning waiting to fall on them. And for American pilots, the change was obvious. They were no longer flying missions with dread. They were flying with momentum. They knew they had the faster climb, the harder dive, the stronger machine. The balance in the Pacific was shifting, not just in technology, but in psychology. Because when your enemy believes the rules no longer protect him, he starts the fight already defeated. The P-38 didn't just bring firepower, it brought shock. Shock that broke the myth of Zero superiority. Shock that spread through every Japanese squadron. And once that shock set in, the skies were never the same again. American pilots learned fast. If you tried to turn with a Zero, you died. Simple as that. The Japanese fighter was lighter, quicker, sharper in every curve. So US pilots stopped playing by Japanese rules. They made their own. It was called boom dash and dash zoom. The plan was simple. Climb high. Stay above the enemy. Wait. And when the moment came, dive. Dive like a hammer falling from the sky. At over 400 miles per hour. The P-38 was untouchable. Its twin engines screamed. The air shook around its wings. And the Japanese pilots looked up in shock. By the time they saw it, it was too late. The lightning struck with everything it had. 4.50 caliber machine guns. 120mm cannon. All mounted in the nose. No spread. No convergence. Just a wall of fire aimed straight ahead. A Zero caught in that burst didn't stand a chance. Wings tore apart. Engines burst. The sky filled with smoke and fire. And before the survivors could even react, the lightning was climbing again. That was the zoom. Back up to altitude. Back into safety. Back into position for another strike. The Zero tried to follow, but it couldn't. Its engine wheezed in the thin air. Its wings trembled in the dive. And its pilot knew chasing a P-38 meant suicide. This tactic broke Japanese confidence. The old dance of the dogfight was gone. No more circles. No more endless turning battles where the Zero always had the edge. The lightning refused to play that game. It made its own game. One Japanese veteran later said, "The P-38 was like a hawk. It stayed high. It chose the moment. We were the prey." American pilots loved it. They no longer feared the deadly turn of the Zero. They embraced their plane's strengths, power, altitude, speed. Some called it death from above. Others said it felt like dropping the hammer of God. But all agreed. Boom and zoom worked, and it did more than win battles. It sent a message the Japanese couldn't ignore. Because every time they saw those twin tails glitter in the sunlight, they knew what was coming. Not a duel, not a turn fight, but a strike, fast, deadly, Final. The Lightning didn't need to fight on equal terms. It fought on its own terms. And those terms rewrote the war in the Pacific sky. With boom and zoom, the Americans flipped the script, the hunters became the hunted, and the Zero once feared as unstoppable suddenly looked fragile. The P-38 proved a simple truth of air combat. You don't win by fighting the way your enemy wants. You win by fighting the way he fears. And in the skies over the Pacific, that fear had a name: the Lightning. For months, Japanese pilots had flown with pride. They were the hunters. They were the masters of the sky. Every time a Zero took off, its pilot believed he owned the air above him. But that confidence began to crack. The first time a Zero couldn't escape a P-38 dive. The first time a Lightning chased one higher than its engine could climb. The first time a burst of nose guns shredded an ace before he even turned. The myth of invincibility broke. Japanese pilots whispered to each other. They had always mocked American machines, but now they started to fear one. The twin-tailed fighter, the strange shape, the sound of twin engines screaming down from the clouds. They gave it a new name: two planes, one pilot. Some called it the fork-tailed devil, and the devil terrified them. For American pilots, the effect was the opposite. At first, they had felt like prey. Every sortie meant fear. Every encounter with the Zero felt like a gamble with death. But with the P-38, that fear faded. Each mission brought proof. Proof that they could climb away. Proof that they could dive faster. Proof that they could come home alive. Confidence replaced doubt, and confidence is a weapon. One pilot said, "Flying the Lightning felt like having armor on your soul." Another wrote, "The Zero no longer looked like a monster. It looked like a target." That shift mattered more than numbers on a chart, because battles are not won by machines alone. They are won by the men inside them. When Japanese pilots climbed into their cockpits, they carried new fear. What if today I meet the twin tail? What if I can't escape? What if my luck ends in fire? When American pilots climbed into theirs, they carried new pride. What if today I get him before he even sees me? What if today I dive and change the fight? What if I come back not as prey, but as hunter? This was the psychological war. And in that war, the Lightning was already winning. The Zero's legend was built on fear. Fear in the hearts of its enemies. But once that fear vanished, so did the legend. The invincible fighter became vulnerable. The hunters became hunted. And every Japanese pilot who saw those twin tails in the distance felt it in his chest. A cold weight. A shadow that whispered, "You are no longer safe." That is how the P-38 changed the Pacific. Not only with speed or guns, but with something greater. It broke the enemy's spirit. And it gave its own pilots the courage to fight on. Because once the mind shifts, the battle is already half won. Every great plane needs great pilots, and the P-38 Lightning had the best. Two names stood above them all: Richard Bong, Thomas McGuire. Together, they rewrote the record books. And they did it flying the twin-tailed devil. Richard Bong was a farm boy from Wisconsin. Quiet, polite, the kind of man you wouldn't expect to become America's deadliest ace. But once he climbed into a P-38, everything changed. Bong had a natural touch. He understood the Lightning's strengths. He flew it not like a machine, but like an extension of himself. He scored his first kills in 1942, and then kept going, and going. By the end of the war, Richard Bong had 40 confirmed victories, the highest scoring American ace of all time. And almost every one of those kills earned an AP-38. Thomas McGuire was different. He was fiery, competitive, a perfectionist in the sky. If Bong was smooth and patient, McGuire was bold and aggressive. He studied the Lightning like a scientist. He knew exactly how high to climb, how hard to dive, how long to fire. Every mission, he pushed himself and his plane to the edge. McGuire ended the war with 38 confirmed victories, second only to Bong. And yes, he too made his legend in the cockpit of a P-38. Together, Bong and McGuire proved something powerful: that the Lightning wasn't just a good plane. It was the best. The kind of fighter that turned skilled men into legends. Other American planes had their champions: the Mustang, the Corsair, the Hellcat. But no aircraft produced aces like the P-38. It gave its pilots speed to chase, climb to outpace, firepower to end fights in seconds, and toughness to bring them home after missions that would have killed them in anything else. One of Bong's fellow pilots once said, "In the P-38, we felt like we had the upper hand every time. It was our sky." Even the Japanese took notice. Reports spread of certain pilots who seemed unstoppable, the ones with kill after kill, the ones who never seemed to fall. And the Japanese knew those names: Bong, McGuire, the Lightning's Angels of Death. By the war's end, America's top two aces were both P-38 men. And that was no coincidence, because the Lightning wasn't just a fighter. It was a legend maker, a machine that gave ordinary men the chance to do extraordinary things. And when history remembers the greatest pilots America ever had, the P-38 is always there too. Twin tails, twin engines, and a record of victory no one could deny. The Lightning didn't just win battles. It made legends, and Bong and McGuire were the proof. The P-38 Lightning was built to fight, but it did so much more. It was more than a dogfighter, more than a zero killer. It was a machine that could take on almost any role in the war. First came reconnaissance. The P-38 was fast. It could fly high. It could cover thousands of miles in a single mission. So engineers stripped out the guns, added cameras, and sent it out alone, deep into enemy skies. From Europe to the Pacific, the Lightning became the eyes of the Allies. It photographed enemy bases, mapped coastlines, spotted troop movements, and brought back images that changed battle plans. Some historians say the recon P-38s were more important than the fighters, because without those photos, generals were blind. With them, they knew exactly where to strike. But reconnaissance was just one side of the story. The P-38 could also strike the ground, hard. It carried bombs under its wings. It fired rockets and volleys. It tore apart supply lines, bridges, convoys. Japanese trucks were shredded, airfields burned. Even ships at sea felt the sting of the Lightning's wrath. One pilot described a ground attack run in the Pacific. It felt like holding a hammer, the size of a mountain. Everything we hit broke. That versatility made the P-38 different. It wasn't a one-trick pony. It was a toolbox of destruction. Dogfight. It could win. Escort bombers. It had the range. Ground attack. It carried the bombs. Reconnaissance. It brought back the pictures. Few planes in history have ever done so much, and fewer still did it so well. By 1944, the Lightning wasn't just a fighter in the Pacific. It was a multi-role war machine, the kind of aircraft that could be sent on any mission and trusted to get it done. That made it invaluable, because in war, flexibility is power. The side that can adapt wins, and the Lightning could adapt to anything. Japanese pilots learned to fear its guns. Japanese generals learned to fear its cameras, and Japanese troops on the ground learned to fear its bombs and rockets. One plane, many roles, always deadly. That was the Lightning's true secret. Not just that it could outdive or outclimb the Zero, but that it could do everything else too. It wasn't just a fighter. It was a hunter, a bomber, a scout, a symbol of industrial creativity. And when the war finally ended, the Lightning left behind more than wreckage. It left behind proof. Proof that the best war machines aren't built for one job. They're built for every job. The P-38 was living proof of that idea, and it made history because of it. April 18, 1943, the Pacific War was raging, and on that day, American intelligence picked up a secret message. It was from Admiral Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, the man who had planned the attack that pulled the United States into the war. The most wanted man in the Pacific. The message revealed his schedule. He would be flying from Rabaul to Bougainville. The time, the route, the plane, everything was there. This was the chance to strike at the very heart of Japan's war machine. But there was a problem. Yamamoto's plane would be deep inside enemy territory, hundreds of miles from any American base, too far for most fighters, too risky for bombers. There was only one aircraft that could do it: the P-38 Lightning. With its twin engines and long range, the Lightning could fly over 1,000 miles, fight, and still come home. No other Allied fighter had that reach. 18 P-38s were chosen, hand-picked pilots, carefully briefed. Their mission was clear: find Yamamoto, bring him down. They flew low, just above the ocean waves, hour after hour, skimming the water to avoid Japanese radar. Silence in the cockpits, every pilot knowing this mission was unlike any other. Finally, they spotted him. Two Japanese bombers, escorted by Zero fighters. One of those bombers carried Yamamoto. The Americans attacked. The escorting Zeros tried to react, but the Lightnings came fast, diving, firing, turning the sky into chaos. One P-38 lined up on the lead bomber. A burst of machine gun and cannon fire ripped into the engines. Smoke poured out. The bomber staggered, lost altitude, and crashed into the jungle below. Inside was Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, dead. The other bomber was destroyed minutes later. The escort scattered, chased off by the lightnings, when the surviving P-38s returned to base. The mission was confirmed. They had done it. They had killed the man who had started the Pacific War. The impact was enormous. For the Japanese, it was a crushing blow to morale. They had lost one of their most brilliant naval minds, a leader who had commanded respect across the empire. For the Americans, it was a moment of justice, a message that Pearl Harbor had not been forgotten, that even in the vast Pacific, there was no hiding place, and it proved something else. That the P-38 wasn't just a fighter, it was a precision weapon, capable of flying farther, hitting harder, and changing the course of history. One mission, one plane, one kill that echoed across the world. The Lightning had lived up to its name, fast, sudden, deadly, and with Yamamoto's death, the tide of the Pacific War began to turn. The day Admiral Yamamoto was killed, something broke inside the Japanese command. Until then, many believed the Zero was enough, fast, agile, deadly. It had ruled the skies since Pearl Harbor. But Yamamoto's death proved something different. It proved that the P-38 Lightning wasn't just another enemy plane. It was a hunter, and it could strike anywhere. No one was safe, not even the mastermind of Pearl Harbor himself. For the Japanese High Command, the message was chilling. Their most important leader had been tracked across hundreds of miles. His bomber, thought secure, had been intercepted in minutes. And the killer, not a battleship, not a submarine, but a squadron of fighters with twin tails and range no one thought possible. Word spread quickly, first through the officers, then through the pilots, then through the camps. And with every telling, morale sank lower. If Yamamoto could be killed from the sky, what hope did ordinary pilots have? If the Zero could no longer protect Japan's greatest commander, how could it protect anyone? The realization was brutal. The Zero was no longer the master. The Lightning was. Pilots began changing how they fought. Before, they would dive eagerly into battle, certain of victory. Now, they hesitated. Now, when they spotted those twin tails, they thought twice. Reports from the field show it clearly. Zeros were avoiding combat with P-38s whenever possible. They attacked only when they had overwhelming numbers, or when they had no choice. The hunter had become the hunted, and the Japanese spirit, the confidence that once carried them through battle after battle, began to fade. One pilot later admitted, "We feared the Lightning. When we saw its shape, we felt the battle was already lost." For American pilots, it was the opposite. They flew with new pride. They knew they had the range. They knew they had the firepower. And they knew the enemy was afraid of them. That shift was more powerful than any weapon. Because war is not just fought with bullets. It is fought in the mind. And after Yamamoto's death, Japan knew the truth. The P-38 Lightning was not just another fighter. It was a symbol. A promise that the balance of power in the Pacific was changing. From that day forward, Japanese pilots could no longer laugh at the strange twin-tailed plane. They could only respect it and fear it. The realization was clear. The Zero was yesterday's legend. The Lightning was tomorrow's reality. And every time its twin engines roared across the Pacific skies, that reality grew louder. War isn't won by courage alone. It's won by numbers. By factories. By the ability to replace what is lost, faster than the enemy can destroy it. And here, America had the ultimate advantage. While Japanese factories struggled to keep up, the United States was building war machines on a scale the world had never seen. The P-38 Lightning was proof of that power. In California, at Lockheed's Burbank plant, the assembly lines never slept. Day and night, workers, men, women, even teenagers, built the twin-tailed fighter in staggering numbers. One P-38 rolled off the line every hour. Thousands were built before the war was done. Each one was more than just metal and engines. Each was a promise, a guarantee that America would never run out of planes, never run out of firepower. Meanwhile, Japan was trapped. The Zero had been their pride. But factories in Japan were small. Resources were limited. Fuel, steel, and aluminum grew scarcer every month. For every Zero lost, replacing it was a struggle. Pilots were being trained faster than planes could be built. And worse, every Zero shot down was a loss Japan could not afford. The math was brutal. America built over 10,000 P-38 Lightnings. Japan, across the entire war, produced fewer than 11,000 Zeros that could match the fight. And by the later years, those Zeros were no longer equal. They were outdated. That's where the Lightning shined brightest. Not only was it powerful, not only was it feared, but there were always more of them coming. One Japanese officer later admitted, "For every zero we lost, it was like losing blood. For every lightning they lost, 3 more replaced it." And that was the truth. American factories turned war into arithmetic. Zeros down, more P-38s up. Losses in combat, replacements already on the way. Pilots rotated out, new ones trained with better machines waiting for them. Japan could not keep up. The Lightning was more than a fighter. It was a symbol of industrial might, of an economy so vast that it could outproduce every enemy combined. And this mattered as much as speed, altitude, or firepower, because while skill can win a battle, only production wins a war. By 1944, the Pacific skies were filled with twin tails, flying in formation, escorting bombers, diving on Zeros, hammering ground targets. And the Japanese pilots looking up knew something they could not ignore. Even if they shot one down, there would always be another, and another, and another. The Lightning's engines roared with power, but behind those engines stood something even louder, the factories of America. And that roar would echo until the war was won. When the war began, the P-38 Lightning was mocked, strange, awkward, a twin-tailed oddity that looked more like an experiment than a fighter. But by the end of the Pacific War, it had become a legend. Some historians would even call it the plane that won the Pacific. Why? Because it did what no other fighter of its time could do. It had speed, it had firepower, it had range. No Japanese Zero could match all 3, not even close. The P-38 could escort bombers thousands of miles across open ocean. It could dive faster than any enemy dared follow. And when its guns opened up, for .50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all firing straight ahead, the effect was devastating. One burst could shred an enemy plane before it even had time to turn. That combination changed the skies. But the Lightning's legacy isn't just in numbers or victories. It's in the men who flew it. Richard Bong, America's top ace with 40 kills. Thomas McGuire close behind him with 38. Both flew the P-38. Both trusted it with their lives. Both proved it was more than just a fighter. It was an ace maker, and it wasn't just about dogfights. The P-38 flew reconnaissance missions that mapped enemy strongholds. It carried bombs and rockets in ground attacks. It hunted ships at sea. It even carried out one of the most daring missions of the war, the interception of Admiral Yamamoto, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor. That single mission showed the world the reach, the precision, and the power of the Lightning. By then, even its enemies had changed their tone. The Germans called it the fork-tailed devil. Japanese pilots, once so confident in their Zeros, now feared its shadow overhead. The plane they once mocked had become the hunter, and the laughter had long since died. After the war, the P-38's influence lived on. Its lessons shaped the jet fighters that followed. Its design inspired engineers to think beyond convention, and its reputation left a mark on history that cannot be erased. For the men who flew it, the Lightning was more than an aircraft. It was survival. It was confidence. It was the sound of 2 engines roaring when only one should have kept them alive. And for those who fought against it, it was respect, because when you faced a Lightning, you knew you were up against something different, something built not just to fight, but to win. So when we remember the Pacific War, we remember the carriers, we remember the bombers, we remember the island battles, but in the skies above it all, streaking across the ocean with twin tails gleaming in the sun, there was the P-38 Lightning, the plane that started as a joke and ended as a legend. At the beginning, they laughed, twin tails, too strange, too heavy, too slow. The Japanese pilots mocked it. Even American pilots had doubts. The P-38 Lightning didn't look like a winner. It looked like a mistake. But war doesn't care about first impressions. It only cares about what survives. And the Lightning survived everything. Zeros tried to outclimb it. They failed. Zeros tried to outrun it. They failed. Zeros tried to turn inside it. And before they knew it, they were cut down by a wall of .50 caliber fire. The hunters of the Pacific had become the hunted. What was once a joke became a nightmare. What was once mocked became feared. And those same Japanese pilots who laughed at the odd American fighter now prayed they wouldn't see its shadow above them. The irony was perfect. The plane dismissed as too ugly, too big, too different, became the plane that changed the war in the Pacific. It gave America reach across oceans. It gave pilots confidence they had never felt before. And it proved that true power isn't always pretty. Sometimes, it's twin tails slicing the sky. Sometimes, it's 8 guns roaring in perfect unison. Sometimes, it's a name, Lightning. Fast, unstoppable, Devastating. That was the P-38. And that was the shock that changed the war. And if you want more stories like this, the hidden weapons, the turning points, the forgotten legends of history, make sure you subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss the next battle we uncover. And tell us in the comments, which World War II plane do you think was the true king of the skies? Because history isn't just about what happened, it's about what it meant. And the P-38 Lightning, it meant victory.